Defection of No Kum-Sok, elite North Korean fighter pilot. As North Korean fighter pilot No Kum-Sok gazed down at the ruins of Pyongyang at 19,000 feet, he weighed up the pros and cons of defecting for one last time. A decorated veteran of the Korean War, if he stayed, he would live the rest of his life in comfort. If he left and plunged into the unknown, there was a high chance he would perish in the process. Then suddenly, he envisioned a lifetime of mind-numbing ideological meetings, lies, betrayal, and denunciation. His mind was made up. He simply had to escape. Beginnings. No Kum-Sok was born into a well-to-do family on January 10, 1932, in Singhung County, at the time when North Korea was under the control of a brutal Japanese colonial regime. His father was No Ja-hyu, a senior manager working for a Japanese construction company. By the time he was 12 in 1944, No idolized the Japanese Emperor Hirohito. Desperate to play some part in the war against the advancing American scourge, he asked his father for permission to be a kamikaze pilot. His response was revealing. "You want to dive into an American warship? Are you crazy?" It was at this moment that he realized his father's loyalty to Imperial Japan was not at all as encompassing as he had previously thought. First encounters. Following the conclusion of World War II, a flood of soldiers from the Soviet Union pillaged, abused, and murdered their way across North Korea. As a result, the family fled into South Korea, where they first encountered American soldiers. In contrast to the loutish Russians, No was greatly impressed by their behavior, cleanliness, and orderliness. Getting his hands on several picture books, he became enchanted with the United States, and in particular with one image depicting a happy California couple driving a big automobile while a friendly dog poked its nose out of the window, enjoying the cool breeze. Discouraged by the faltering post-war South Korean economy, the family moved back to North Korea, where No's communist teachers proclaimed the USA to be a poor country. Having seen irrefutable proof to the contrary, he knew at once that everything he was being taught was a lie. From then on, No dreamed of escaping to America, living a lie. As he grew up, No learned to hide his pro-American leanings with the best possible cover. He engrossed himself in state-sponsored education, avoiding Japanese and English words, and displayed fake enthusiasm for the teachings of communism. All the while, he waited and searched for an opportunity to break free. In 1949, as Kim Il-sung moved his armies closer to the 38th parallel to threaten violent reunification, No was conscripted into the North Korean Navy. Since his father had worked for the hated Japanese, he had to lie on his entrance exam about his origins in order to pass. Terrified his problematic background would be exposed, No allayed suspicion by becoming the Naval Academy's star pupil, being awarded an A in communist history for his efforts. It was a grade that would alter the course of his life. For following the outbreak of the Korean War, with the recommendation of his history professor, No was deemed ideologically committed enough for pilot training in China. His chance to take flight had finally come. The fighter pilot. As a trainee who could potentially fly away and defect, No's political loyalties were closely monitored by his commanding officers. To remain undetected, he established and managed a pro-communist newspaper for the airfield while keeping his snooping comrades at a comfortable distance. In the summer of 1951, after 50 hours flying time in a MiG-15, he qualified as an elite jet pilot, and by the end of the Korean War, he had been promoted to senior lieutenant after flying over 100 combat missions. A number of obstacles had stopped him from making a break for South Korea. No was discouraged by the fact he never had precise coordinates for a South Korean airstrip that could accommodate a MiG-15. Additionally, he was worried about being immediately shot down by his comrades or being blown up in the air by anti-aircraft American fire as he made his escape. To maximize his chances, No Kum-Sok waited just under 2 months after the end of the war to make his move. The escape. In September 1953, No received orders to report to Sunan, a village less than 10 minutes by air to the 38th parallel. On the morning of September 20th, he was informed by his officer that, as the most experienced pilot, he would be one of the first to take off from the base for the next day's mission. Not only would he be flying close to South Korea, but he would be doing it alone. Moreover, this time he knew exactly where to land. A year prior, as part of an aborted mission to attack inside South Korea, he had learned the precise location of an American airbase at Kimpo, how to approach it, and how much fuel he would need to reach it, information which he had hastily scribbled down on a notepad at great personal risk. On the morning of Monday, September 21st, the skies were clear with moderate wind. In other words, perfect flying conditions. At 9:05, No took off in his MiG-15 right after his comrade, Lieutenant Cha, who had gone first. Flying halfway to China, he then reoriented his craft so he was heading towards the interior of North Korea. Next, instead of turning left so he could land on schedule in Sunan, No Kum-Sok made a life-altering decision. He turned right. Increasing his airspeed to a blistering 620 miles per hour, his heart slammed into his chest as he dashed south towards the 38th parallel. As he approached the border, he scanned left and right to see if he was being followed. Nothing. Suddenly, from his radio, he heard the control tower give Lieutenant Cha permission to land. He knew he was next in line. Soaring over a range of rugged mountains, a message came over his radio. "Where are you, 87? Again and again, every 5 seconds as he passed over into South Korean airspace. As he flew above foreign skies, No was surprised he hadn't been intercepted by one of the many American sabers patrolling the area. He didn't know it, but this was because he had been blessed by 2 remarkable strokes of good fortune. The Kimpo radar had actually been turned off that morning for maintenance, and the few American pilots who had caught sight of him did not recognize his MiG as an enemy aircraft. All of a sudden, Kimpo Air Base came into view, and No realized that he was approaching it from the wrong direction. He also noticed that a saber was coming in to land in front of him. Worried it would spot him, pull up, and shoot him down, No made a split-second decision to land to the left of the runway on an adjacent dirt landing strip. However, the saber came in faster than he expected, taxiing off the main runway and leaving it completely clear. No seized the opportunity and prepared for touchdown. As he extended his landing gear, though, he spotted another saber coming in to land. They were going to collide. Having clocked the MiG-15, the saber pilot, Dave Williams, veered right at the last moment and the 2 planes roared past each other at 140 miles per hour. "It's a goddamn MiG!" shouted the American captain to his radio. With the Americans unsure of whether to fire at him or not, No eased his fighter into the empty slot between the 2 parked sabers. The whole journey had taken 17 minutes. Smashing the framed photo of Kim Il-sung that adorned his cockpit, he stepped out and began shouting the only English word he could remember from school. "Motor car! Motor car!" A startled group of American pilots came out to meet him, and trying to appear friendly, he began shaking their hands. His wish was granted, and No was whisked to the headquarters of the American 5th Air Force in a car. There he was given his first taste of an ice-cold Coca-Cola and an opportunity to explain himself. He soon learned that he would be the recipient of $100,000, a prize that had been offered by the Americans to the first North Korean pilot to successfully deliver an intact MiG-15 as part of Operation Moolah. No's childhood dream had come true, but without even knowing it, he had become a rich man in the process. Back in North Korea, there were several repercussions for No's actions. Based on information given by Lee Eun-yong, another defector, General Won Young, the leader of the North Korean Air Force, was demoted, and 5 of No's immediate officers and fellow pilots were executed for failing to stop his defection. North Korea also practices collective punishment for family members of transgressors, though his father had died previously and his mother had already escaped to South Korea. Due to the secretive nature of the North Korean government, the fate of No's other family members is impossible to determine. The MiG was taken to an American military base in Okinawa, where it was repainted with U.S. Air Force markings and test flown by Captain H.E. Collins and Major Chuck Yeager. It was then transferred to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio and later to the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force near Dayton, Ohio, where it is currently on display. After gathering as much intelligence on the aircraft as possible, the U.S. offered to return the jet to North Korea. This offer was ignored. In 1954, following lengthy interrogations in which he revealed much useful intel about the inner workings of the North Korean military, No Kum-Sok changed his name to Kenneth Rowe and settled in the United States. He died on December 26, 2022, as he wanted to live, a proud American citizen.
The Sokcho submarine incident, 1998. In the 1990s, the life of a sea fisherman in South Korea, where its fishing industry had been booming since the 1950s, was a relatively simple one. One of its most popular catches at the time was the eel-like beltfish, and seemingly the only threat to the fishermen's peaceful existence was the constant ongoing disputes with the Chinese authorities over fishing rights in the region. A recently developed scheme implemented by the South Korean government was beginning to worry many of the local fishing boat owners. This scheme was aimed at streamlining the fishing industry and making it more efficient, and had already led to 618 fishing vessels being scrapped. Then one day in the summer of 1998, near the South Korean port of Sokcho, a commercial fishing trawler crew had the biggest catch of their lives, a 110-ton midget submarine. It was, in fact, a North Korean Yugo-class midget submarine that had snuck over the maritime border between North and South Korea and had now become entangled in the trawler's fishing nets, forcing the submarine to surface. The fishermen watched as the submarine crew managed to cut away the netting and began to sail north, but before long it came to a standstill and just floated helplessly on the surface as its engine had stalled and stopped running. They reported the incident over their radio to the authorities, who dispatched some anti-submarine helicopters to the area, who confirmed its location. South Korean Navy's surface ships soon surrounded the stricken vessel and at first tried to communicate with it by radio. And when that failed to get a response, they used loudspeakers and even tried tapping on the outside of the hull. As it was practically impossible to board the submarine at sea, they fastened it with a long rope to one of the Pohang-class combat corvettes at the scene, ROKS Gunsan, which towed it to the port of Tonghae. The South Korean Navy had only 2 years before captured a North Korean Shark Sang-O-class submarine that had run aground in South Korean territorial waters while on a spying mission. This captured submarine is now on public display in the South Korean Unification Park in Gangneung, where visitors can go on board the vessel through special hatches that have been cut into the side of the hull. As for the captured Yugo-class midget submarine, while it was being towed into the harbor at the naval base at the port of Tonghae, it mysteriously sank in 100 feet or 30 meters of water, taking all of its crew down with it. It wasn't known if it sank because of mechanical failure or the crew had deliberately scuttled their own vessel. The next day, on June 23rd, the North Korean authorities issued an official press release saying that the submarine had been lost at sea in a tragic training accident. 2 days later, on June 25th, the South Korean Navy managed to salvage the 66-foot or 20-meter-long submarine out of the water. After cutting a hole into the hull, they were horrified to find 9 dead bodies inside, 4 of which were North Korean Special Forces operatives, and the other 5 were submariners of the North Korean People's Navy. All of the Special Forces team had apparently committed suicide, but before they did, they had executed the sailors, presumably to stop them from being interrogated and revealing any important secrets. North Korean military edict dictates that any personnel should kill themselves rather than be captured by the enemy. So this order would have been carried out without any hesitation by the Special Forces men, who would have also made sure that the submariners were also dispatched with them. A logbook found on board the vessel showed that the submarine had infiltrated into South Korean territorial waters many times before, and there was evidence that when it got entangled in the fishermen's nets, it was returning from yet another espionage mission in the south. Also found inside were a number of AK-47s, machine guns, grenades, pistols, a rocket-propelled grenade launcher, and some South Korean drinks, as well as a 1995 issue of Life magazine. The bodies of the submarine crew were buried in a cemetery in Paju that was reserved for North Korean and Chinese soldiers and referred to as the enemy cemetery. North Korea refused to accept the bodies of those killed in the south, as they claimed sovereignty over the whole of Korea. Therefore, the fallen were already buried on Korean soil. Over the next decade, there were several further incidents at sea between the two Koreas. By far the most serious and deadly one occurred on the evening of the 26th of March 2010, when the small corvette warship ROKS Cheonan was hit and sunk by a torpedo when sailing near the maritime border between North and South Korea in the Yellow Sea. This explosion resulted in the death of 46 and the wounding of 58 of the Cheonan's crew of 104, meaning the ship suffered a horrific 100% casualty rate. Also, one of the team's divers died while searching for survivors in the rescue mission during the adverse weather conditions. Remains of the torpedo were found at the scene by rescue divers and identified as belonging to a Type CHT-02D torpedo, which were manufactured by the North Koreans. This type of torpedo doesn't actually hit its target, but detonates a short distance from it, which in this case was just below the ship's gas turbine room, causing a bubble and jet explosion, which effectively forces a pillar of water up to 100 meters in the air. The high-pressure shockwave can smash a 1-meter hole into a ship and can physically break a small craft in half. The subsequent South Korean inquiry concluded that the Cheonan was sunk by an unidentified North Korean midget submarine. This view was supported by experts from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Sweden. But this report was firmly rejected by the North Korean and Chinese governments. The Russian Navy also carried out their own separate investigation, but declined to ever make its findings public. Currently, it's estimated that the North Korean People's Navy has around 70 to 80 diesel submarines, including quite a few Soviet designs from the 1960s and 70s. Most of these can only fire torpedoes or lay mines. In that fleet are around 20 midget submarines, half of which are of the Yono class, and these first started to enter North Korean service as far back as 1965. Worryingly, over the last few years, they've been developing submarine-launched nuclear missiles, as well as larger and more capable attack submarines to carry them in. One of these is the Sinpo-class ballistic submarine, which is much larger than a midget submarine, at around 223 feet or 65 meters long, with a crew of between 70 and 80, but it only carries one missile which launches vertically out of its conning tower. This submarine is tiny compared to the U.S. Navy's Ohio-class submarines, which are 560 feet or 170 meters long and carry a payload of 24 Trident II missiles. In response to all of this, South Korea has recently invested heavily in upgrading and expanding its anti-submarine warfare ability. One of these countermeasures is the new Daegu-class guided missile frigate, of which 8 ships were initially planned, with a final goal of 20 to 22 in the future. With a crew of 140, they're equipped with the latest electronic warfare technology, which includes advanced sonar equipment for detecting submarines and torpedoes.
The Daehong-dan incident. When North Korea and the US work together, nothing unites quite like a common enemy. Since the 1950s, the United States and North Korea have had a relationship that can generously be described as difficult. Both nations fought one another during the Korean War, and even to this day are warily eyeing one another across the demilitarized zone on the Korean peninsula. In spite of this rocky past, on one occasion, both nations managed to set aside their differences for a common goal, despite still being technically at war. In October of 2007, North Korean cargo vessel the Daehong-dan had just delivered its cargo of sugar from India to the Somali capital of Mogadishu and was returning home. On October 29th, about 70 miles north of Mogadishu in the Indian Ocean, the ship was overtaken by a group of 7 Somali pirates, who posed as guards to gain access to the vessel. Reportedly, these same men were dock workers, who were responsible for the safe passage of the ship when it entered and exited Mogadishu harbor. Somalia had been without a stable government since 1991, when dictator Mohammed Siad Barre had been overthrown, and the nation's economy remained in shambles. Illegal overfishing by foreign fisheries also left local fishermen without a source of income. Situated on the Horn of Africa, Somalia is located next to one of the major global shipping lanes in the Gulf of Aden, which connects to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, as well as the Strait of Hormuz, both vital arteries for global trade. With such bounties floating just offshore, piracy was inevitable. Piracy became so common, it developed into a sustainable industry, eventually featuring a sort of stock market where backers can invest money, weapons, boats, and other equipment for the pirates, sharing in the profits. Each year, hundreds of ships would be attacked, with their crews held hostage for ransom and their cargo seized. The loss of the cargo, the ransoms paid for the release of the crews, security precautions, such as armed guards and more extensive naval patrols, and rerouted shipping lanes to avoid pirate-infested waters, cost the global economy billions of dollars annually. Pirates generally use small, fast-moving boats, which they use to board the target vessel, anything from cargo ships to tankers, or anything that may be a promising target. Valuables would be taken, though often the most lucrative thing stolen would be the crew themselves, who could be ransomed to their respective countries. The number of pirate attacks has waxed and waned over the years, and has been greatly reduced due to international efforts. but the problem still persists and in all likelihood will continue into the foreseeable future. When the pirates seized the Daihang Dan, they herded the 22 members of the crew into the ship's engine room and steering room and demanded a $15,000 ransom for their release. If they did not receive the money, the pirates were willing to execute the crew. Before they were detained, however, the crew of the Daihang Dan managed to perform two critical actions. First, they shut down the engine, telling the pirates they were experiencing engine issues. Secondly, and more critically, they managed to send out a distress call. In a matter of hours, their distress call traveled from an institution in the North Korean capital of Pyongyang to the North Korean embassy in London, then on to the International Maritime Bureau's Piracy Reporting Center in Malaysia, who messaged the Combined Maritime Forces headquarters in Bahrain, until finally making contact with the closest naval vessel to the Daihang Dan. The International Maritime Bureau was established in 1991, coinciding with the collapse of the Somali government and the rise of piracy. The organization is an international effort to combat maritime theft around the globe, acting as an intermediary, picking up calls for assistance, and relaying the information to appropriate military forces in order to handle the threat as quickly as possible. The closest naval vessel to the Daihang Dan was the USS James E. Williams DDG-95, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer which was operating in the region. When it received the information and location of the captured vessel, the Williams diverted course and headed towards the stricken Daihang Dan. As the destroyer approached the captured vessel, it launched an SH-60B Seahawk helicopter. This aircraft, the workhorse of the U.S. Navy, is a maritime version of the ubiquitous UH-60 Black Hawk multi-purpose helicopter used by the U.S. and other armed forces. Like its land counterpart, the Seahawk is a versatile craft and is capable of fulfilling multiple roles, including search and rescue, anti-ship and anti-submarine operations, cargo and personnel transport, special operations, and a number of other functions. On board the USS James E. Williams was a VBSS team, meaning visit, board, search, and seizure. This was a team of trained specialists whose role involved boarding ships to search for contraband, including drugs, weapons, or any other smuggled goods, as well as combating terrorism and, in time of conflict, capturing enemy vessels. During their training, they learned the ins and outs of boarding, searching, and fighting on board an enemy vessel. This is a particularly risky task, as the close confines of a ship, with its narrow passageways, the maze of corridors, and often poorly lit interiors are full of potential dangers. Every hatch is a fatal funnel for waiting defenders, and on larger vessels, it is easy to become lost and disoriented in the labyrinth of an unfamiliar ship. As the destroyer approached the Daihang Dan, it ordered the pirates to surrender. With the distraction provided by the arrival of the Americans, the captors diverted their attention from the hostages, who took matters into their own hands. The imprisoned North Koreans seized the opportunity and, outnumbering their captors by 22-7, they fought back, using weapons they wrestled from the pirates guarding the engine room against them. North Korea had a 10-year mandatory military service for its citizens, making the crew of the Daihang Dan proficient in fighting, catching the pirates off guard, and significantly increasing their odds of success. Eventually, the Daihang Dan was secured and the pirates were overpowered. One of the pirates was killed, 6 North Korean crewmen were wounded, 3 being severely injured. The latter were transferred to the James E. Williams for medical treatment. By a stroke of luck, on board the Williams was a second-generation Korean immigrant who spoke Korean and was able to act as an interpreter between the North Koreans and the Americans. Reportedly, the wounded sailors expressed extreme gratitude to the Americans for their medical assistance. They were transferred back to the Daihang Dan, which soon continued its journey. When word of the incident reached the North Korean leadership, they took an unprecedented step in praising the United States. In an official statement, the government of North Korea released a statement describing the events of the incident, ending with thanks to one of their great political rivals, stating, "We feel grateful to the United States for its assistance given to our crewmen. This case serves as a symbol of the DPRK-U.S. cooperation in the struggle against terrorism. We will continue to render international cooperation in the fight against terrorism in the future, too." There was some hope that the incident would act as a catalyst for further peaceful relations between the two rival nations, who would shortly afterwards engage in nuclear disarmament talks. A spokesperson for the United States stated, "You will always find our Navy prepared to help any ship in distress. I hope the DPRK understands that we do this out of a sense of goodwill." Unfortunately, in spite of any goodwill that may have been generated by the incident, tensions remained high between the opposing nations and had little, if any, long-term effects. Still, the Daehong Dan incident is one of the more unusual events in the long and turbulent relationship between the United States and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. It just goes to show that even the bitterest of foes can work together when faced with a common enemy. Banned in North Korea. Most of what we know about North Korea comes in dribs, drabs, and trickles of information, difficult to independently verify, but smuggled out of the country as carefully as those trying to escape the unrelenting, horrifying, and abusive regime. Among untold levels of human rights abuse, indoctrination, and brutal punishment are the intense restrictions placed upon every aspect of daily life, some of which are so ridiculous to be laughable, if that were even allowed. Laughter. Whoever said laughter was the best medicine clearly hasn't been to North Korea. In 2021, according to an anonymous source, the country announced that North Koreans would be forbidden from laughing for a whole 11 days, in line with the 10-year death anniversary of their second leader, Kim-jong-il. Alcohol, leisure activities, and birthday celebrations were also banned, and on his actual death date of December 17th, citizens weren't even allowed to go grocery shopping. All of this needed strict monitoring too. So, during the anniversary period, law enforcement officials were reportedly not even allowed to sleep, as they needed to dedicate all their time to ensuring no one was enjoying themselves. As a man responsible for flagrant human rights abuses including forced labor camps, generational prison sentences, and public executions, it's no surprise Kim-jong-il's death anniversary came with additional violations. According to one source, if you were seen drinking during the period you were classed as an ideological criminal, then there was very little chance of being seen again, certainly not a laughing matter. You literally weren't even allowed to die, or at least have it acknowledged during the mourning period, assuming you did have the audacity to pass away. Your family wasn't allowed to cry, and your body needed to stay firmly where it was until the full 10 days of mourning had passed. At least you wouldn't feel much like laughing. Sarcasm. Some say sarcasm's the lowest form of wit, and it would appear Kim Jong-un agrees. He certainly doesn't want to hear it anywhere in his beloved North Korea anyway. In many nations, sarcasm is used as a scathing yet subtle way to critique and comment on national governments. In America, "Thanks, Obama" became a sarcastic response to both the successes and failures of the Obama administration. In Britain, where it's used to great effect at all times, but during the 2024 general elections, references to the lack of Sky TV in Rishi Sunak's house growing up were rife. But in North Korea, it's an indirect criticism of Kim Jong-un's government and perceived as a hostile action that could result in the perpetrator vanishing faster than the supreme leader's political opponents. Two phrases especially seem to rile up Kim Jong-un: "This is all America's fault," and "a fool who cannot see the outside world." The former references North Korea's long-held tendency to hold America responsible for atrocities occurring within its own borders, and the latter reportedly refers to Kim's refusal to acknowledge celebrations that marked the end of World War II. Of course, in line with North Korea's general attitude to freedom of thought and speech, sarcasm comes with dire consequences. Liberty in North Korea reported that using sarcasm can lead to not only you, but your whole family ending up in a dreaded political prison camp. According to security officials who warned local residents of this new policy, the best thing to do at all times would be to simply keep your mouth shut. Thanks, Kim Jong-un. Denim jeans. In March 2024, Alan Titchmarsh and his 2010 program Garden Secrets had the dubious honor of appearing on North Korean television. Or part of him at least. Apparently, the North Korean censors are so afraid of the population seeing what Alan Titchmarsh could dig up that the usually hour-long episodes were edited to just 15 minutes. With Titchmarsh dubbed over by North Korean narrators and his denim blue jeans blurred in an attempt to hide the scandalous piece of clothing. The presenter took it all in his stride, saying, "I've never seen myself as a dangerous, subversive imperialist. I'm generally regarded as rather cozy and pretty harmless. So actually, it's given me a bit of street cred, really, hasn't it?" Middle-aged gardeners aside, according to Radio Free Asia, this was all part of an attempt to discourage capitalist fashion trends in North Korea. But as always, the particular focus lay on how women in their 20s and 30s dressed. Allegedly, morality officers like the Socialist Patriotic Youth League organization would police not only denim or skin-tight jeans, but ensure women weren't wearing miniskirts or branded or colored t-shirts, as they promoted capitalist ideals. If caught dressing inappropriately, these women could have their clothes cut up, endure public shaming sessions, and have to write letters acknowledging the heinous crime of wanting to look good. Despite this, brave youth in North Korea continue to challenge the establishment in the very few ways they had available, wearing jeans and brightly colored tops where they could, as per one young woman who said, "If I wanted to wear something like a pair of jeans, I had to sneak around. I'd take back alley streets, or I'd hide if I saw a patrol officer coming my way." Haircuts. Arguably even more gregarious than wearing denim jeans in public is coloring your hair anything other than black, bleaching it, or wearing it in an outlandish style. That is, any style other than one of the few socially accepted haircuts. Men with hair longer than 5 centimeters were subjected to a state-run harassment television campaign in 2005. Abruptly being stopped on the street by camera crews, those unfortunate to be caught with longer than average hair were grilled over their unconventional appearance, while their name and address were shown on screen. It was claimed long hair hurts, quote, human intelligence development and consumes a great deal of nutrition, end quote. Why this did not affect women with long hair was not touched upon. You could get any of these fashionable looks at one of North Korea's government-approved hairdressers, but they aren't the only hairdressers available in the country. Unsanctioned hair salons exist across the nation, trading in scissor snips and brown-colored hair dye, providing North Koreans with a small way to defy the totalitarian regime. Defiance costs, however, with these salons charging 5 times more to give you the freedom of a slightly different style. Punishment for having unorthodox haircuts often added up to being given a stern talking to. Marriage and divorce. Much like laughing during the mourning period for Kim-jong-il, celebrating a marital union on one of the leader's birthdays, the 15th of April or 16th of February, is also prohibited. Other restrictions include anything that could be considered as stemming from the West, such as white wedding dresses or lifting the bride on your back for a photo op. But worse than getting married in white is the mere notion of the idea that marriages aren't always forever. While divorce isn't technically completely banned in North Korea, it's extremely hard to do. Not only did both parties have to agree, but so too did the government, and the government wasn't too fond of agreeing. According to some personal accounts, courts actually refused to grant more than one divorce per day, and even then, it was reluctantly. Getting a divorce in North Korea has always been tricky. In 1956, it was decided that administrative agencies were too generous in the number of divorces they granted, and so it became illegal for them to do so. After that, it was simply down to the courts to decide whether a divorce was permissible. Luckily, savvy North Koreans get around these draconian rules by simply not getting married. Instead, they would perform wedding ceremonies and then just not register for around 3 years. This effectively allows them to trial married life without being sworn in for life. Like in many other countries where it's common for couples to live together before marriage, North Koreans do the same, simply saying they are in the process of registering their marriage. At least now you can try that line on your conservative grandma when she asks you about you and your partner. While enforcement of these rules varied from verbal reprimands to beatings, they show the extraordinary extent the Kim regime strives to restrict the basic rights of its people under the pretense of socialism.
We upload all the videos that we have to censor from YouTube to our Patreon. Right now, you can watch uncensored videos on the Battle of Kantien, medieval warfare, and the Sherman tank, all on Patreon. History is epic. Watch it uncensored.